Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
if you don't want to be on
Recording.
recording, you can take your camera out.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel about professional writing. My name is Oliver, and I'll be the moderator together with Shan today. We're glad to have three wonderful members of Chem Squared here to share their experiences. Let's welcome Kai, Fischer, and Caleb. Say hi to everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey guys. Thanks for having us.
Okay, then I will go over the schedule we have today. So each panelist will speak for 8 to 10 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session together for about 20 minutes to let the attendees to interact with the panelist. So first, Kai will talk about how to write the graduate school application essays. She has been admitted to UC Berkeley this year. Congratulations, Kai.
Thank you.
And, yeah, sure. And then next will be Fischer will talk about how to write business plan. He was the principal investigator for the SBIR proposal that was very competitively rated. And he also has formed his own LLC for that proposal, that one. And he also has full experience with market discovery and validation in has been participate Purdue's Firestarter program. Finally, Caleb will talk about how to write research proposal. He is currently a PhD at Purdue University, and he has been with Chem2 since his sophomore year of the undergrad. And he also has led 2 proposals, and recent one was accepted by the National Science Foundation.
Before we get right into it, I just want to remind all the attendees that feel free to leave your questions in the chat box so we can ask them in the Q&A session. So also feel free to unmute yourselves after all the 3 panelists finish speaking. And Kai, feel free to take it over.
Sure. All right, so I actually made some slides for that, so I guess I'll just share my screen.
Yeah, let me
I'll disable that,
allow you. Wait a minute. Where is the? Oh, okay. Here it is. Try it now.
Okay, got it. Let's see. All right, can you guys see this?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, so then I'll start. Hi everyone, my name is Kai, and today I'm going to talk about how to write application essay for grad school. Just from my personal perspective and providing some small tips on that. So first I'm going to go through the timeline. So from my personal experience, I would separate the whole grad school application process into 3 different steps. The first one is the goal setting step, and I highly recommend you start as early as possible. And after all the goals are set, you should start right into the preparing step, which is where you, fulfill, gain some experience and, fulfill requirements of the application. And finally, when it's the fall semester of your senior year, you will move on to the application status. So for the first step of setting goals, before you start writing about the essay or even thinking about writing an essay, you should always think through some of the questions like, do you want to go to grad school? Why do you want to go to grad school? And what do you want out of this kind of higher education experience? And how does the grad school can help you in your future academic and professional career life? So because there are a lot of graduate programs out there, they have thesis, non-thesis, academic or industrial oriented program, and different programs have different funding, scholarship opportunity, and they also have different program time. And also if you're going to the industry, the location of the grad school is also very important, etc. So overall, I would say this step is where you set the tone for your application essay. And when you go to the preparing step, well, this is the place where this is the time where we start trying to seek opportunities to gain more research experience, like paper writing experience, publishing experience, or internship, co-op opportunities throughout the semester and in the summer. Or also, it's a good time for you to practice your leadership skills, because that could also come in very important in your application. And at the same time, you will also need to keep your GPA up, because that's a very big factor in your application. Well, at the same time, you might also need to prepare for some of the upcoming exams you need to take, like GRE or TOEFL, IELTS, like those English skills exam you need to take if you're an international student. But one thing I want to say specific about this is that the preparing step is not always coming after the setting goal phase, because in my case, well, I do realize I want to go to grad school at a very early stage, but at that time, I didn't know what kind of program or field I want to go into. It's only after I gained my research experience in ChemSchool that I realized, well, I'm really into the visual computing or, crowdsourcing or human-computer interaction, this kind of stuff. So then I started to look into this kind of specific program that can provide related research opportunities. So normally people would say, oh, I want to go to grad school, and what do I need to prepare? But even if it's like, senior year or junior year of yourself, and you just made up your mind that you want to apply for grad school, it's not too late, because when you look back into your previous experience in your high school or your college, you will find something unique that can help you write your professional essay. So this part, I would say it's where you try to gain your experience to fill in the content for your application essays. And moving on to the last process, well, the applying step is where you finally decide which programs you want to apply to. And also you need to gather information like application start date or the requirements of the application and the deadline of the application. Because mostly the programs don't have the exactly same requirements. For example, in my case, some programs only require one essay, which is called the statement of purpose. It's where you write like, why do you want to apply for this application? What this application provide that attracts you so much, or what you can learn from this application that can help you in the future, this kind of stuff. But there were also some other programs, like I believe Purdue, Berkeley both have, is called personal statement or diversity essay. Well, it's where you can write something more personal about yourself, like your personal background, not that academic, or your diversity that can help you be a more exceptional applicant among all the other applicants for this same program. And after you gather all this information, I would say you should just start writing, because this is the state that you should start drafting out and finalize your application essays. So after talking about all these 3 steps, I would like to give some tips, small tips from my personal experience. Well, the first and very important tip is that you should always attend info sessions and the grad expo of the programs you want to apply to. Because in my case, I attended the grad expo, the virtual grad expo Purdue held last year, and attend the one that Berkeley held. And in that info session, the admission officer specifically talks about how important the leadership skill and leadership experience is, and how they value that from their applicants. And that's why I basically devote a whole paragraph in my statement of purpose to Berkeley, that how I gained my leadership experience, and how is that going to help me in my graduate study, and how it's going to help me in my future career. And I do believe that really boosts my application, that makes myself make myself outstanding out of all the other applicants of the same program. And the second tip I would mention is that you should always read carefully through the program information page, because when you're writing the essays, you want to be specific and genuine. You need to talk about what's specific in this program that attracts you so much, that makes you want to apply to, and what makes you so passionate about this specific program. Because when the admission officer are reading through your essay, you don't want them to have a feeling that you're just casting a wide net and apply to every grad school without a difference, right? You want to be specific and genuine. That's the third tip. And another tip I would also stress is that you should always use the tools and resources wisely. For example, you can use the tools like Grammarly to check your grammar error, because I'm not a native speaker. And the grammar error is definitely the last thing you want the admission officer to see in your essay. And there were also some other resources Purdue provide, for example, the Purdue Online Writing Lab, in my case, which is very helpful because, they provide a lot of different services like one-on-one counseling on even how to write an essay, picking out the theme of your essay, and how to revise your essay before you finally submit that to the application, etc. And the last tip I would say is you need always have to keep track of the applications, because normally a student would apply to several different programs, some even up to 10 or 15 different programs. And you have to keep track of all the deadlines or the requirements, so you make sure you don't miss out a thing. And yep, that's all I want to say about how to write graduate essays, and I will hand back to the moderator for the next part.
Okay, thank you so much for the detailed sharing, Kai. So we will keep all the questions in the Q&A session for all the three panelists to answer. So to move on, let's keep to next panelist. Fischer, do you want to talk about yours?
Sure, I'll be talking about how to develop a business plan. I'd also like to share my screen. I don't know if you have to give me permission for that or not. Let me see.
I think you can share it.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes, great.
Cool. Okay, so my name is Fischer Bordel. I'm an incoming graduate student at Purdue. I graduated last December from computer engineering. I was in Cam 2 for about 2 years before I graduated, maybe 2.5 years. I don't really remember. But during my senior year, I decided I want to help Dr. Liu in commercializing some Cam 2 technologies. So I'm not a marketing student. I'm not a business student, but I had to learn essentially how to draft a business plan for the purpose of commercializing these technologies. So hopefully I can present this to you as someone also with an engineering background, if you're interested in entrepreneurship, but maybe don't have an entrepreneurial background yourself. So I decided to write an SBIR proposal. SBIR is the National Science Foundation's Small Business Innovation Research Program, which is made to fund small businesses with high-risk technologies. So for a business like this, having a technology, a good technology and technological roadmap is just as important as knowing how to market it. So writing this proposal taught me a lot about how to write a business plan, and I hope to share that information with you today. So a business plan is simply a plan of how your business will go about accomplishing its goals. In many cases, this is how you provide your product to a set of consumers. So every business plan starts with an idea. In this case, your idea is something you want to bring to market. I think this is the hardest part of drafting a business plan, and many people go about it the wrong way. Before you proceed with developing your overall plan, you need to validate that the need for your product actually exists. So the only way you can do this is by speaking to customers. Usually you would think you want to develop the idea of your business before you speak to customers, but from my studies, that seems to be the wrong way to go about it. So in my case, my intended customer base was news agencies, and I was seeking to use our technologies to reduce the amount of misinformation in the news. So in order to ensure that these problems I wanted to solve actually existed, I interviewed roughly 40 people that work in the field of news media. And I asked them what the biggest problems they face in their day-to-day lives with regards to misinformation and news are, and how they think they could realistically be solved. Then I aggregated these opinions and used them to iterate upon my solution and find out how we could use our technologies to solve these problems. So the biggest takeaway from this is that I didn't present my ideas to them and say, would you be interested in this? Or how do you think we could apply this to your field? Instead, I asked them what their problems are and then shaped my solution around solving these problems. Because you can imagine if you present your idea to your potential customers and say, do you think this would be useful? They might say like, oh yeah, that would be useful to us. But if you actually ask them their problems, it might not actually be solving their biggest problems. So you need to determine what their, as called in the field, pain points are, and whether you can actually address them. So after you determine your idea has a market, you can actually start to formulate your business plan. And the process of writing this will probably make you think deeper about your product than you've ever thought up until this point, and it's likely going to change in a lot of ways. So the next step after determining that you have a potential market is drafting what's called an executive summary. So this document is not longer than 1 page, and it simply states what your problem is, what your market is, what your innovation is, and how your innovation addresses these problems. So I went with the NSF guidelines for an executive summary. There's many different ways you can write this, but I think this is useful for a lot of different fields and is very versatile. So essentially you start off by describing what the problem is. For me, it's misinformation exists in the news. It's hard for reporters to verify information, etc. Then you describe your innovation. Following this, you describe what's called your intellectual merit. So the consequences of your innovation success and why it's useful, why it's important. This part is extremely important if you're seeking funding. And further, a lot of potential investors or programs will be interested in the broader impacts of your innovation, as well as the commercial potential. So how will your innovation change society as a whole, and more than just the customer base that you're focusing on selling to? And also, do you actually have a market? What's your plans for how to address this market? What's the size of this market, et cetera? So like I said, this shouldn't be longer 1 page. This should be able to allow you to send this to anyone you want to market your business to. And in 1 page, give them the entire rundown of your innovation, your market, and how you address these problems. So it should be immediately clear to the reader what your business idea is from this point. Once you can draft this, then you can actually make your business plan. So to develop the actual business plan, I recommend using the business model canvas. Lots of workshops and courses I took learning how to draft a business plan recommended using this. And the areas on this chart are essentially the foundational building blocks for a business plan. And it's kind of a neat way to organize your ideas. It's really modular and it gets rid of a lot of the fluff. And it's super flexible for tweaking as well. So I'll briefly describe the sections on the canvas. The key partners, these are external suppliers, companies you have to do business with. For me, we focus on using real-time camera data. So maybe partners could be camera vendors or camera hosting sites on the internet. Key activities, this is what your business needs to do to achieve its goals. The resources, this is like practical resources you need to perform your business, such as computational power. For me, we would use cloud computing, employees, web hosting, etc. The next part, value proposition, is probably the most important part. Well, everything on here is important. You can't have a business without any of the sections, but this is the most fundamental area. And despite the size, it doesn't actually need to be that lengthy. This is essentially the concept of the exchange of value between your business and your customers. So what is the value of your innovation, and why people should do business with you, essentially. The relationships, this is how you interact with your customers, such as in person, online, over the phone, etc. And channels, this is how customers initially gain knowledge of your business, possibly search engine marketing, email marketing, advertising, etc., social media. The customer segments, this is how you divide your customer base into distinct groups. Understanding these is extremely critical for any sort of investment seeking purposes or writing any proposal, knowing exactly what kind of customer segment you're addressing. And you don't need to address all of them at the same time. For example, our main customer segment was news agencies in my business plan, but it's important to know that there are other segments you can address through technology potentially as well. So we might also market ourselves to government entities, for example. So keeping these distinct groups is important because you market to different groups in different ways. Your cost structure. So this is the cost of doing business. There's lots of costs you won't think about up front, such as paying employees, registering your business, legal issues, logistical costs, insurance, research and development, possibly depending on your company, et cetera. And writing the budget is maybe the most difficult part of any sort of business plan or proposal writing. So this area needs to be given a lot of thought. And finally, you have your revenue streams. So this is how you make money. Maybe a fixed price per product or a subscription. In my research and a lot of the workshops I attended, they recommend using a freemium model, which is essentially an option to give a free trial of your product to customers. And from my interviews, this seems to be the most desired approach by consumers. So definitely consider that if you can apply your business in that way. So if you can totally fill out the business model canvas, you essentially have a business plan. The point of the canvas is it's super easy to edit and it's super clear to get your point across. And you can apply this for any sort of grant writing, proposal writing, investment seeking that you would need to. Beyond this, there's a lot of facilities at Purdue that offer entrepreneurial assistance to students. The John Martinson Entrepreneurial Center, directed by Dr. Liu, helps students and staff in commercializing engineering ideas. The Purdue Foundry also has a lot of programs for students that are interested in entrepreneurship. Particularly, I recommend looking to the Purdue Firestarter program, which is modeled after the NSF Core program, which will teach you things such as drafting a business plan, customer discovery, etc. So even if you're a student with no business experience, there's lots of things at Purdue that can help you get started. So that concludes my presentation.
Oh, thank you so much for the sharing. And as usual, we will move to the next panelist and we'll handle all questions on the chat channel in at least 20 minutes. So Clip, you can now talk about your stuff. Yep.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
Sweet. All right. Well, I'm going to talk to you guys about writing research proposals, or as it is more, appropriately known, we are going to talk about high-class begging. Is actually what this is. This isn't really anything more than that. You are quite literally begging people to give you money so you can go and do stuff, right? Fischer is, please give me money so that I can start a company, and then obviously this company is now going to be providing value to the economy and things like that, right? When you write a grant, there isn't always a guarantee that anything necessarily of monetary value is going to come out, right? So it's definitely high-class begging. It's very cool. Professor Liu likes to joke about being a high-class beggar, so that's why this is here. Okay, the question here, obviously, that is what does a research team run on? And of course, we know the answer. It is money, right? Research teams need actually quite a lot of money. And this is kind of sad and unfortunate when you think about the fact that, what exactly is going on in a research team? Well, people sit at computers and then just bang out code and write papers, right? So it can't actually be that much money. Well, let me, that's what I thought, actually, before I started writing a proposal. Once you start writing a proposal, you realize there's lots of things that our research team is spending money on. The research team spends money on bills and things like that. We've got to pay to keep the lights on. We've got to pay for furniture. We've got to pay internet, all this kind of stuff for our labs and equipment like this. There's a lot of bills to pay, right? Purdue has building maintenance fees, all that kind of stuff. That's all stuff that's coming out of our research budget. The computers, the GPUs, all those kinds of things we have, again, that's coming out of the research budget. We need drones. If you need literally anything for research, the reason you can walk into Professor Liu's office, well, I guess you can't right now, but the reason you can talk to Professor Liu and say, hey, I need some money to do X, right? I want to go to a conference to go learn about this thing, right? I'm going to need $800, right? The reason you can do that is because we have a giant pool of research money that we can pull stuff out of, right? The reason you can just have Raspberry Pis whenever you want is because we have money that we can just pull from and pay for things. A huge chunk of the money also does go pay for these three bums up here, the graduate students, that it is actually quite a huge chunk of money going to pay for graduate students because of overhead costs and stuff like that. A graduate student, I'm not sure if this is a question for a later panel, but a graduate student at Purdue, at least, isn't really making much more than $20,000 a year. But once you roll in the tuition and all of the other overhead costs and stuff that Purdue charges, a professor ends up needing to pay maybe around $80,000 to $90,000 per graduate student. So it is quite expensive, and sometimes you wonder if some graduate students are worth the value. But that aside, I'm going to talk real quick about my experience writing proposals. I don't think I'm an expert at writing proposals. We have experts, they're called the professors. But I'll talk about what it was like for me to write it and why I kind of think actually it's a good idea for other people to write proposals too. The first thing with a proposal is that's a ton of planning. Fischer talked about, he needs to spend all this time developing a business plan. when you're writing a research proposal, it's somewhat similar in the sense that you might be, as an undergraduate researcher, maybe you're used to planning for a project or planning for a proposal or planning for a paper, right? It's kind of like, okay, 6 months down the road, we're going to do this. With a research proposal, you're talking about years of research, right? You need to plan out years of research. The proposals that I've done were about 3 years. So you had to plan out about what kind of research can your whole team complete in 3 years, right? You need to, like Fischer was talking about, you need to consider large scale impacts, right? This is something that you don't typically consider when you're writing papers. You need to think about, okay, if this technology is done, if our research completely succeeds and does what I say it will, what's going to happen to the research community? What is going to happen to industry? What's going to happen to the world? Is there going to be some effect of the thing that I make, right? You have to think several papers down the line. You can't just think one paper. You have to be like, okay, now that this paper is written, we can build on this paper and write this paper. And then when that paper is done, we can build on that and write this next paper. This is really good if you are a PhD student, particularly, because as a PhD student, you've got to write a dissertation at some point, right? And a dissertation is going to be the collection of sort of all the papers that you've written during your time as a PhD student. So this basically allows you to plan out your entire PhD effectively. You can plan out your entire PhD through the process of writing a proposal. And so after that, when it comes time to, okay, what's the next paper I'm going to write? You kind of already know because you planned it out, right? The last thing is that when you submit a grant, it's going to go to different organizations, right? You might be submitting a grant to a proposal to Facebook or maybe Microsoft, right? The ones that I was submitting to were to the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation has lots of different categories that you can submit to. They're looking for different things. For example, you might have one department saying, hey, we're looking for ways to integrate artificial intelligence into chemistry somehow. Right? Obviously, if you're not doing that, you can't submit a proposal there. So you want to kind of tailor your proposal to the interests of that agency. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to get a lot of feedback from the professors. Here's an example of what I mean when I say there's a lot of planning, right? This is the proposal that I submitted that just got accepted. And this proposal is all summed up in this one slide. And you can see basically every single one of these boxes is one unique component of research, right? When we're talking about generating image depth maps and when we're saying, oh, background segmentation, camera location integration, how are we going to generate context, all this kind of stuff. This is all multiple papers, right? So then you break each of these things down and then be able to tell the review panel that, look, you know, this looks like a single unit. This is one giant unit of research, but it's going to be broken down into lots of little pieces, right? I can walk through this super quick. Basically, the way it works is we want to be able to make cameras, well, computer vision in particular, be able to use contextual information. And I'm sure you guys have heard about this before. The idea is we say, okay, we've got a camera set up somewhere and it's giving us images. Now, normally you would just take the image and put it through a computer vision model, right? And then it comes out the bottom and then, oh, I get some predictions and that's it, right? But now we want to say, we want to integrate contextual information. So if you see at the top here where it says background segmentation, image depth map, stuff like that, we want to extract additional information from the image, right? What is in the background, right? Where's the sky? Where are the buildings? How deep and far away are things from the camera? Where is this camera located, right? And then be able to do processing with that information to determine, now that we know that, what can we infer about the scene that we're looking at, right? For example, if you say, I know where a road is, well then I'm gonna look for cars there, right? In this case, you say, I know where the road is, but we're in Venice, so there's not gonna be cars on the road, so no cars, right? You can generate areas of interest. You can generate hierarchies of where objects are and where objects won't be, right? This allows you to do things like save energy when you're running a computer vision model, right? If you already know where to look, you can save energy because then you won't go looking everywhere in the image. You'll only look at certain pixels, right? This also allows you to be able to sanity check any model that you train. Because, for example, if your model tells you, oh, I detected a person here, you go, great, but according to my contextual information, there should not be a person there. That seems like maybe your model has a problem. And you can do that label free, right? Because you don't need to label anything with ground truth and stuff like that. So this is basically the overall idea behind the project. Say, can we extract contextual information from cameras and then use them to A, make computer vision models more efficient, and B, sanity check them automatically without using ground truth labels. This is expected to take maybe about like 10 papers, 10, 11 papers. And you look at it and go, like, oh, that's great. Sounds like it would be one interesting paper. It is, but you can also break it down into lots of individual papers, right? What this ultimately ends up entailing practically is you have a lot of time revising content, lots of time making figures. I'm sure you guys are used to this with the papers that you write, but with a proposal, it's lots of revision, because the goal here is not, hey, with a paper, your goal is to say, look, I did some research. What do you think? Pretty good, right? And they go, yeah, pretty good. And then that's all. When you're writing a proposal, you say, hey, look at some research I haven't done yet. This is research that I plan to do. Pretty cool, right? And they go, yeah, pretty cool. And then you say, great, now give me money. And they say, oh, well, wait a second. You want us to give you money, right? So this is another step. This is not only have you not done the research yet, but you're asking people to give you money for it, not just tell you, it's pretty good, sure, let's publish, right? So what you want to do is first convey that you are the expert, right? We know our stuff. In a paper, everyone just sort of assumes you are the expert because it's very easy, right? You have one specific thing you're talking about and then you just talk about it. With a proposal, there's so many things. You have to do a very extensive literature review for this. And then you need to convey that, look, we know exactly what we're talking about, but you also can't convey it with tons of detail because the people reviewing your proposal aren't necessarily the same experts that you would expect to be reviewing your paper. They're not necessarily going to be familiar with everything about your proposal. So you have to convey it easy, right? You have to be able to convey it in a way with a lot of figures, with lots of very easy to read text to say, look, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is why we think it's going to work. This is why we think it's important, and this is why we think you want it. Convey you want our stuff. That's very important, right? If the reviewer just isn't interested in the motivation of your proposal, they're not even going to go look at the technical content, right? So those three things, I think, are basically the 3 bullet points that you have to keep in the back of your mind when you're writing. Sometimes I would sort of forget these things, and then I would write something that might work out in a paper, but just wouldn't work out well at all in the proposal. And then, of course, I'd have to go back and revise that. So if you can keep those 3 things in the back of your mind, I think that'll make writing a proposal a lot easier. This takes a lot of time, unfortunately. The proposal I wrote was about 15 pages. I had to spend many hours on it, and my name isn't on it. Right, Professor Liu's name is on it. Professor Thirvothikal's name is on it. My name isn't on it because I'm a graduate student. If you're a graduate student, you can't be a PI on research proposals going to the NSF, right? So that means this isn't going to help me graduate. I won't be able to put it in my dissertation. I won't be able to do things like that and say like, oh, look, I can graduate faster now. And there's no guarantee that the proposal gets accepted, right? I've worked on a total of 3 proposals. I led 2 proposals. Obviously, one of them is the one that got accepted. But the other 2 proposals I've been on, they didn't make it. And it's a lot of time you spend, and the guarantee is rather slim that you actually do get the proposal accepted. And this is all just for a small proposal, right? It took me about a semester to put this whole proposal together, and on top of that, you have some additional research responsibilities, you've got school, and that's all just for a small proposal. NSF has different proposal categories. This is a small proposal, it's worth about $500,000. If you step up to like large proposal, that'll be like medium proposals, so it'll be like $2 million, or I think $2 to $10 million. And then large proposals are the really big ones that have millions and millions and millions, and then those generate research centers, right? So it takes a lot of time, but I still think it is actually really worth doing. The reason I say that is because even if your proposal doesn't get accepted, companies actually quite like this skill. If you want to go work for a research company, if you want to go work for a startup, it's actually a really good idea to do this, because this shows that you know how to convince, or at least you've had practice trying to convince people to give you money for research that you haven't done yet, right? And that's a very cool skill to have. It's a different way of writing because, again, you haven't done the research yet, but you're trying to convince someone that you are the expert and that they should give you money for it. It's a different writing muscle, one that I never really got to exercise before just writing papers. So I think it's really worth it. This third one is huge, right? You learn how to put a budget together. I feel like I didn't really know how to spend money. And you think, oh, everyone knows how to spend money, come on, right? But you don't really know how much things are worth and how much is reasonable to budget for a certain task, right? Like if I told you, hey, here's a research project, we're gonna do this, create a budget, right? You've got to be able to say, okay, well, we're gonna need this many people on it. This is how much the people are gonna be paid. This is the type of equipment we're gonna need. This is the contingencies we're gonna need. This is all of the additional support, right? Like this is all something that I never knew before writing this proposal. So that's really cool. And the fourth point I think is probably the biggest one. You get to really become a visionary type of researcher, right? Instead of just being in close and saying, I'm working on this next paper, you get to have a really big picture, kind of like what the professors do, right? The professors have that big picture of what everyone in the team is doing and how it all fits together. You get to do that now too, because you wrote the proposal. So you understand how everything is supposed to fit together. And I think that's really cool. So that's all I have. I think this is actually really good practice, regardless of if it gets accepted. If it does get accepted, I will tell you this: it is a huge confidence boost, because again, it's you knowing that people are willing to give you money for things that you write, right? And that's a huge confidence boost. So if you do get accepted, great, awesome confidence boost. And if you don't, I think there's a lot of good value to be gotten out of that. I didn't go into tons of detail into like the nitty-gritties of how to write this thing. If you are interested in doing that, Professor Liu is always happy to have more students help write proposals. You can just ping me on Slack or email me. Either is good. But yeah, thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you, Caleb, for sharing. And thank you all three for your wonderful presentations. So now we'll have a Q&A section. So there are already a few questions dropped in the chat box. So let's take a look at those. So there are a few for Kai, I think. So Naveen dropped a question, which is what's a competitive graduate school GPA? I mean, yeah.
Well, I guess that really depends on the school, because most of the school, they on the graduate program page, I think they have a statistics about what's the average GPA of a admitted student. So for example, Berkeley has an average about 3.7, I think. But normally, I guess over 3.5 would be very helpful. But if you're saying competitive, I would say 3.8, 3.9.
Okay, thank you. And Mohammed had a question for Kaiwan also. So did you apply for a PhD or a master's program? If it's PhD, were you talking to professors while applying or not?
Well, I personally applied for a master's program. So I didn't talk to any professor before I'm applying, but I mean, there are definitely some PhD programs that you need to talk to professor and ask if they have, positions open for more new incoming student or not, because I believe Purdue doesn't really require that, but Caleb can add to that, right?
Yeah, so when it comes to applying for a program, you do not need to have a professor attached. What you can do, obviously, usually, and I'm sure Kaiwan, like everyone will know this if you do it in an application, there's a spot on the application that says, are there any particular faculty you're interested in working with, right? That might have been something you already wrote into your application essays and things like that, right? But if there's a professor like that, usually the admissions committee will tag that particular professor and say, hey, here's the student's application information. Now, if you think about it, if you go to a top tier university like Purdue or Berkeley, these professors are getting lots of these sorts of things, right? Lots of admissions committee just dumping them resumes and saying, or applications and saying, hey, look, there's a student that liked you. What do you think, right? They don't really have a reason to sit there and go through all of those things in detail. So you definitely, it is not necessary, but it's a really good idea to try to have some one-on-one contact with the professor first. One thing you do want to pay attention to though is you want to stalk the professor first, go to their websites and things like that. And if they have on there something like, if you are interested in working with my team, do not contact me, talk to the admissions, apply, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then this particular professor just wants to go through the admissions process and doesn't want you to talk to him in advance. In that case, right, don't go and try to email this person. But otherwise, it is I think quite nice to have a professor that you already have been talking to. if you can. It's not necessary though. I
Yeah.
know Purdue basically said if you have a 3.9 GPA and a professor that at Purdue is basically already happy to take you, you're guaranteed to get in. So stuff like that is definitely helpful.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Also, one last question for Kai. What was the purpose for you to apply graduate school? And I think Grace's second question: did you have to know professors in the university before you apply? I think Kai and Caleb already answered this question. So yeah, the purpose of applying to graduate school.
Yeah, well, for me personally, I applied to the Berkeley Master of Engineering program, which is an industrial-oriented program, which means normally after you graduate from this program, you will go right into the industry, right? So apparently that's my plan for the short career goal. I'm not sure whether I'm going to for doctoral program after maybe several years in the industry. But yeah, for now, my purpose is to go into the industry after grad school. But I mean, grad school is a good place to, dig deeper into some of the fields you like because it's more specific. And also you can connect to some other companies because there were a lot of capstones. They can work, the school can work together with some of the companies, in Silicon Valley or something like that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So next question is for Fischer. So Naveen dropped this question. How long did it take for you to establish the entire business plan? What were your initialized steps with commercialization and how did you approach the clients?
So writing a business plan is an iterative process, and it's hard to say exactly when it starts, when it ends. But essentially, when I started writing my proposal, I submitted about 6 months later. I would say a good 3 months were dedicated to customer discovery, and it took a lot longer than I thought it would. And this kind of bridges into the third question: how did you approach clients? Because that's the longest part. Basically, to approach clients, I just spammed everyone on LinkedIn that worked in news media. I mean, I literally sent out probably 2,000 messages, maybe more. I don't know, probably more, because almost no one replies. So the few that do, that actually give me interviews, they're few and far between. So writing the business plan takes a long time because of external factors like trying to gain this new information, etc. But even writing it, once I performed customer discovery for 3 months, I still would have liked to have more time in the end. Like we submitted our plan at the very last minute. You could submit for the SBIR grant. So it takes a long time. And even still now, there's still things I would change on it. So it's a really iterative process. And the initial steps, like I said, is approaching customers. You can't do anything unless you know exactly what kind of market you're targeting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that's all that we have in the chat box. So the rest of you guys, if you have any questions, so feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to ask the questions. I have a question for Fischer. So what do you think are some common mistakes that we might want to avoid when writing a business plan?
Well, there's two. The first one, like I said a few times already, is not doing customer discovery first. In all the workshops for the SBIR I attended and Purdue Firestarter, they always said the most important thing is customer discovery, and having an actual market plan is more important than having a technological roadmap or a plan for research. It seemed counterintuitive at first because, like, what I was applying for was an SBIR grant, so I could continue research and development for this business. But really, the business will go nowhere if you have no market, obviously. So the biggest mistake is jumping straight into your business plan or straight into your technological plan or your plan for your innovation without actually nailing down your market segment first. The second one was not obvious to me at the beginning, which is having unrealistic financial expectations. So generally for big investors or for proposals that will give you a lot of money, they're not looking for you to be profitable in the first few years. In my first plan, I wrote, oh, my business will be profitable after 1 year. I predict this will be our profits. And basically everyone I talked to asked to review it, they're like, that's unrealistic. You'll never get funding. People want high risk technologies that'll have to be developed for a long time and then have the ability to change the entire market. They don't want something like that'll get a little bit of money quickly. So don't look to make money fast. Plan long-term for the future. Don't plan to generate a profit quick, or it'll look like you aren't planning long-term. So I think those are the two biggest mistakes.
All right, thank you. I've also got 2 more questions for Caleb. So what do you think is the most important part in the research proposal in terms like when we attract people to look at the research proposal? Like, what do you think is the part that we want to like focus on?
Okay, so is your question like what how do you attract, like how do you make your proposal sound worthwhile?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, well, if you want to make your proposal sound worthwhile, it's sort of the steps of, you know, what is this particular grant program you're applying for? What are they looking for, right? And then how can you match your proposal to those things? So if they say, you know, we're looking for, like the proposal I applied to, right? They're saying we're looking for cyber infrastructure that has some good impact on the research community. Okay, that's a very general thing. So you have a lot of flexibility to work in there, right? So in that case, you don't really need to worry so much about, okay, is my proposal a good fit, right? What you instead want to do is say, okay, I just got to make sure that when I'm talking about this proposal, if someone said, how would you describe your proposal, or how would they describe your proposal, they could describe it using, you are generating cyber infrastructure that's going to have some impact on the research community, right? As long as you can do that for your proposal, that's helpful. Now, as to making it interesting, what you want to do is have like lots of examples, and your writing needs to be exciting and interesting. So there needs to be at the start just lots of motivation. Normally with a proposal, right, you go, okay, get it all done with a paper. You put in the introduction and move on, right? With a proposal, there's lots and lots of, hey, here's why this is awesome. This is why this is really cool and why you want this. This is why this is a problem that you care about, right? There's a lot of that in a proposal. So I think that's probably the most important part about a proposal. Just being able to convince them that they care about what you're solving. Because once they care about what you're solving, it's a lot easier for your technical content to look cool, right? Because they care about it. So they go, oh, your technical content, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it seems like you know what you're talking about. All right, yeah, sure, give it a try. Let's give you some money, right? That's definitely the way to go, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer it?
Yeah, that does answer my question. Thank you. So does anyone else have any questions for the 3 panelists? Okay, if not, I think that is all for today's panel. Thank you all 3 again for your wonderful presentations. Thank you all the other attendees for participating in this panel. Thank you all. You guys have a nice day.
Thanks. See you guys.
See you guys. Bye.
See ya.